Now, Hind Hassan is a journalist, formerly of Vice News, and she's one of the last people to have interviewed Yahya Sinwar in Gaza on the 2nd of June 2021.
Those lists of demands included for Israeli police and forces to leave Al-Aqsa, for the people in Sheikh Jarrah, for their homes to be protected, and also for the blockade of Gaza to be lifted. None of these have actually been guaranteed to you. Are you committed to this ceasefire?
Well, in that interview, the two discussed the hostilities between Israel and Hamas at the time, the future of Gaza and the situation in the occupied West Bank. Sinwar told Hind it was unfair for the world to expect Palestinians to be well-behaved victims of Israeli violence. Well, we can now speak to Hind Hassan. She joins us from London. What a unique insight that you must have had there into this man, into this leader of Hamas for many, many years, who we've just had confirmed was killed yesterday on Wednesday in Gaza. Can you tell us a little bit about what he was like to interview?
Absolutely. So just to clarify the clip that you saw, so the interview went out on the 2nd of June, but we'd actually met him at the end of May because it was a very surreal experience how it all came about. It was during the time that Israel had been bombarding Gaza. There was 11 days of bombardment. Hundreds of Palestinians had been killed. The crossings into Gaza had been blocked. There were a lot of us journalists trying to get in. And once we did manage to get in, after the bombardment had stopped, we saw just horrific destruction in a lot of residential areas. And that was just after 11 days at that time. And when we went in, we understood that there had been attempts to target Yahya Sinwar during those 11 days of bombardment. And all the journalists were clamoring to try and interview him, but the word on the ground was there's no way that anyone was going to get anywhere near him. He was likely to be in hiding. There's just no way we're going to be able to get an interview with Yahya Sinwar. And so one of the days we get out of our car, we're walking down the street, we're with the local Palestinian journalists who are with us, and I'm with producer Lama Al-Aryan. And there's a commotion. There's a group of people and they're walking down the street and there's a lot of people gathering around them, and we're looking over to see what's happening. A group of men had walked out of a mosque, and then one of our Palestinian local journalists who were working with us said, "I think that's Yahya Sinwar." So we look over, and it does look like him. So we decide at that moment to cross over the streets and just approach him. Now, no security stopped us. Nobody got in our way. We managed to just stroll up to him, and we stood in front of him, introduced ourselves, told him that we were journalists and that we had come from the United Kingdom and from the US, and that we wanted to do an interview with him. And he stood there and he listened to us and he gave us the time and he listened to what we had to say. And in the end, he said, "Well, my team will take your details and they'll be in contact with you and we'll see if we can arrange something." And we made sure that we took that opportunity to say to him, "Well, you've made this promise now. I should hope that because you've made this promise, you'll follow through and you really will try to give us an interview." But we didn't believe that we would have that opportunity regardless. But the next day we were working and we received a phone call, and it was from his team. And they said, "Come to this location, come at this time, and you can do the interview." And still at that moment, we thought that something was going to happen, it would fall through. But we turned up at the location, we set our cameras up, and we waited patiently. And then Yahya Sinwar entered through a different entrance to us. He came in, he introduced himself, we sat down. We were told we only had a limited amount of time and we could only ask him a number of questions, but actually he allowed us to go over that designated time, and he allowed us to ask more questions than we were initially supposed to be asking. And he didn't shy away from some of the tougher questions as well. He answered some of them. You just mentioned that he spoke about what type of victims they should be, but there were many other topics that we touched upon. And then when we finished, he got up and we had some discussion, small talk before he left, and that was it. And we had no idea at that time that we would be the last journalist to have an on-camera, one-on-one interview with him.
Did you get a sense that this was a man who was in hiding from Israel, was being hunted down by Israel, or a man who was defiant in the face of the occupation and the numerous wars that Israel has launched on Gaza, a man who was willing to die for the cause?
I mean, like I said, he was walking down the street. Israel had been bombing Gaza for 11 days, and everyone had believed he was in hiding. He was walking down the streets in full view. People were around him. I walked up to him. He had no idea who I was. And I walked up to him and nobody stopped me. And I managed to go straight to him and spoke to him. And I think also in the days after, he did do a press conference with other journalists. And also, I think he also told, he sent a message saying, I'm going to be walking down the streets. And if Israel wants to target me, they can do that. And when he came in the interview, when we spoke to him, you know, there are sometimes politicians have a set script that they deliver. They know what they're saying. They repeat the same message over and over again. But there was one moment when I asked him about, you know, people say that you fire rockets into Israel and that's also a war crime. And that's when he got passionate. That's when he spoke about how they are expected to be perfect victims, and that's something that they cannot be. And he also drew a comparison, he drew a parallel, he drew a comparison with the George Floyd movement and what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and the Palestinians. So that was something else that he added, and he did get very passionate. And yeah, he came across as a man who was defiant in what he was doing.
And you often get a sense of who someone is by who they surround themselves by. What were people like who were around him? And the people that you met in Gaza, what did they think of him? I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, what is Yahya Sinwar's legacy going to be? Because, of course, he was a hero of the resistance, but he's also pulled Gaza into a year-long war that has been the most devastating the Palestinians have ever seen.
Well, the people, we didn't really get to communicate too much with the people around him. We met maybe with one or two people, and just in terms of human interactions we had with them, they were very open to us debating with them, pushing for this interview. You know, sometimes we were very abrupt with them, and they took no offense to that. We managed to have very typical conversations that you would have with any political leader and their teams in any other place. So that was really something quite surprising to us. In terms of the legacy, I think that there is going to be a divided legacy. For many people, it will be October the 7th. And I think for a lot of other people, they see him as somebody who has been in Hamas right from the very beginning. He was in Israeli prison for 22 years. He was the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He became the leader at the end. And so for many people, he is that the head of the Hamas resistance. But I think the biggest issue for a lot of people now is what comes next. And I've had some of your guests have been repeating this question over and over again, because the reality is that thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed by Israel in Gaza. They continue to be killed every single day. There are more victims in Gaza today. More children are dying. There are large areas where food can't get to. There are people who are dying of starvation and malnutrition. And I think without the leader of Hamas, without Yahya Sinwar, the fact that he's now being assassinated, it's going to be very difficult to understand how negotiations will progress and how this bombardment and the killing of Palestinians in Gaza will end.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you whether there was any sign of a deputy or group of leaders around Yahya Sinwar advising him, or whether he was very much a man who led on his own.
To us, he appeared to be a man who, of course, will listen to people, but he appeared to be able to make his decisions. I believe that it was his decision to give us this interview because we asked him directly for the interview and asked him to follow through on the promise that he had made. There's a reason why he didn't give anyone else an interview during that period. There's a reason why he gave it to us, and that was because we directly asked him for that. In terms of who comes next, I mean, his brother, Mohammed Sinwar, has been suggested as a potential leader, but then I don't know if there's also speculation that he may have been in that attack or involved in that attack. But I assume that the Hamas leadership will have known that this was likely a possibility, that it was possible that Yahya Sinwar would be assassinated by Israel. So I'm sure they have a plan in place.
Hind Hassan, absolutely fascinating insight that you've been able to bring us and our viewers there. Many thanks indeed. That's Hind Hassan, who was one of the last people to have interviewed Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip in 2001. Thanks, Hind.
Thank you.